Yesterday afternoon at the Mass in Farley, 4 o'clock, I had the celebration for the class reunion for the class of 1958 from St. Joseph's High School. 60 years, that's a long time. So they were all gathered in the church and they're all kind of sitting together in a group, and I said to them, 1958. I said, do you realize that in 1958, my parents still did not even realize that each other existed? They didn't think too much of all that. So it's another story in itself. But we had a lot of fun. It was a good time. Always good to get together with those groups and with lots of groups we have for different celebrations and such within our parishes. This weekend, we gather as a parish to celebrate our annual fall festival, so that's always a nice time, and we see lots of people that come back, maybe that have belonged here before, and we'll have lots of guests and visitors, so we welcome them very warmly with hospitality today as well. Hospitality is a virtue of discipleship, and discipleship really is what our gospel reading is about today. Being a disciple, being called by Jesus. In the Gospels, there are lots of examples of people being called. Probably some of the more prominent, more familiar to us are like the example of Peter being called as Jesus is walking along the seashore, and he runs into Peter, and they are in a sense kind of downcast because they've been casting their nets and have been catching nothing all night long. And so Jesus says, well, try one more time. Just cast it out off the side of the boat and see what you get. And when they oblige and they do so, they haul in a whole load of fish, so much so that Peter realizes that there is something special about this guy. And he kneels down and just says, I'm a sinful man, Lord, depart from me. But Jesus says, just leave all of this behind and come and follow me. And Peter's willing to do that, to leave everything that is familiar, everything that is comfortable, everything that is safe, if you will, and to follow Jesus. James and John are the same way. Also, the story of the call of Andrew in John's gospel is very similar as well, and he goes and finds others as well and brings them to Jesus and invites them to be called. There's another story, the famous story of Levi the tax collector, who later changes his name to Matthew, and that's probably the name we're more familiar with, who Jesus goes and dines in his home and says, come and follow me. And he leaves back behind everything that he did before and begins to follow Jesus. We have, in a sense, in our gospel today as well, this young man who runs up to Jesus and says, Teacher, tell me what I must do to inherit eternal life. And Jesus goes through the commandments. Well, do not defraud, do not steal, do not honor your father and mother, and all these different things. And the man is like, checking off the list and saying, I've done all those things. And Jesus says, well, there's one more thing that's holding you back, and that is that you have so much stuff that you are prohibited from truly, in a sense, enjoying the good news and living the gospel life, that you can't do it. You got to, in a sense, remove some of those barriers that hold you back. And at this, the man went away sad, walked away. It's the only account in the gospel where a call was invited and offered to someone, and they rejected it. That's really what the man did. He rejected the call to follow the Lord. So it is, in a sense, kind of a challenge to us as well. What gets in our way? What prohibits us from following Jesus? Lots of times people interpret this particular a gospel passage as some sort of an abomination on people who have lots of possessions or lots of wealth. And that's a misinterpretation. That's not what Jesus is saying at all. You can have lots of things and lots of stuff, and it doesn't necessarily have to get in the way of you being a person of gospel value. Caring for the sick and reaching out to the needy and, listening to, the lonely and the downtrodden and such. With all different ways that we can be disciples in different aspects of our life. But when things become possessions for us and hold us back, that's where the danger comes in. The disciples were amazed by this, and they said, well, what are you talking about? Because in Jesus' day, if you had wealth, you were considered blessed by God. And Jesus is saying that's not necessarily the case. It's in the sense that you cannot be held back. That's what it means to be a disciple. You have to kind of go all in. So I think that's the challenge that we're faced with. You know, how do we look at our faith life? How do we look, at how we practice the gospel and how we reach out to others and really truly see those who are in need? But then what do we do about it? What do we do about it? That's the question, I think, the challenge that we're presented with today. There's lots of different ways that we can live gospel values. I talked about hospitality today, how we will offer that to our guests and visitors, but I'm sure that all of you can think of different ways that you can do that as well. So the challenge is, what holds us back from doing so? I think that really, truly is what Jesus is saying to us today, and it's a good challenge for us to think about and to reevaluate in our own self.